Why don't you sit here? Bill can sit here.
Well, thank you.
Before we get started, I think there were some pioneers. Of course, we have the pioneers here on stage, but there were some other really important pioneers in the video we just saw, and a couple of them are here in the audience. So, Mitch Kapor, who is a regular at D, could you just stand up and wherever you are, there he is. And Fred Gibbons, who has not come to D before but is here tonight. Fred. There's Fred. Right there. And I don't know if he's in the room, but I do want to recognize our fellow journalist Brent Schlender from Fortune, who did to my knowledge, the last joint interview these guys did. It was not on a stage, but it was a Fortune magazine interview. Brent, I don't know if you're in the room. If you are, can you stand? Maybe he's
way back there.
Way over there.
So let's get started. I wanted to ask, there's been a lot of mano-a-mano catfight kind of thing in a lot of the blogs and the press and stuff like that. And we wanted to, the first question I kind of was interested in asking is what you think each has contributed to the computer and technology industry, starting with you, Steve, for Bill, and vice versa.
Well, Bill built the first software company in the industry. And I think he built the first software company before anybody really in our industry knew what a software company was, except for these guys. And that was huge. That was really huge. And the business model that they ended up pursuing turned out to be the one that worked really well, for the industry. Mm-hmm. So I think, but the biggest thing was Bill was really focused on software before almost anybody else had a clue that it was really the software. That's what I see. I mean, a lot of other things you could say, but that's the high order bit. And I think building a company is really hard, and it requires your greatest persuasive abilities to hire the best people you can and keep them at your company and keep them working, doing the best work of their lives, hopefully. And Bill's been able to stay with it for all these years. So,
Bill, how about the contribution of Steve and Apple?
Well, first I want to clarify, I'm not fake Steve Jobs. What Steve's done is quite phenomenal. If you look back to 1977, that Apple II computer, the idea that it would be a mass market machine, the bet that was made there by Apple uniquely, there were other people with products, but the idea that this could be an incredible, empowering phenomena, Apple pursued that dream. Then one of the most fun things we did was the Macintosh, and that was so risky. People may not remember that Apple really bet the company. Lisa hadn't done that well, and some people were saying, okay, that general approach wasn't good. But the team that Steve built, even within the company, to pursue that, even some days it felt a little ahead of its time. I don't remember that Twiggy disk drive.
128K.
Yeah.
The Twiggy disk drive, yes.
Steve gave a speech once, which is one of my favorites, where he talked about, in a certain sense, we build the products that we want to use ourselves. So he's really pursued that with incredible taste and elegance that has had a huge impact on the industry. And his ability to always come around and figure out where that next bet should be has been phenomenal. Apple literally was failing when Steve went back and reinfused the innovation and risk-taking that have been phenomenal. So the industry's benefited immensely from his work. We've both been lucky to be part of it, but I'd say he's contributed as much as anyone.
We've also both been incredibly lucky to have had great partners that we started the companies with, and we've attracted great people. I mean, so everything that's been done at Microsoft and at Apple has been done by just remarkable people. none of which are sitting up here, today.
Well, not us.
Well, you're sort of the
Not
not us.
And
You're in a way you're the stand-ins for all those other people.
in a way we are. In a very tangible way.
So Bill mentioned the Apple II in 1977 and 30 years ago, and there were a couple of other computers which were aimed at the idea that average people might be able to use them. And looking back on it, a really average person might not have been able to use them by today's standards, but it certainly broadened the base of who could use computers. I actually looked at an Apple ad from 1978. It was a print ad that shows you how ancient it was, and it said thousands of people have discovered the Apple computer. Thousands of people, and it also said, you don't want to buy one of these computers where you put a cartridge in. I think that was a reference to one of the Atari or something.
I don't know.
You want a computer you can write your own programs on. And so the world, and obviously people
We had some very strange ads back then. We had one where it was in a kitchen, and there was a woman that looked like the wife, and she was typing in recipes on the computer with the husband looking on approvingly in the back. Stuff like that.
Yeah, how did that work for you?
I don't think well.
So, but just think back to, I know that you started Microsoft prior to 1977. I think Apple started the year before in 76. Microsoft in
74 was when we started writing the
75.
BASIC. And then we did shipped the BASIC in 75.
Okay. Most people, some people here, but I don't think most people know that there was actually some Microsoft software in that Apple II computer. Do you want to talk about what happened there, or how that occurred?
Yeah, there'd been the Altair and a few other companies, actually about 24, that had done various machines. But the 77 group included the PET, TRS-80,
Commodore.
and Commodore PET. TRS-80, and the Apple II. The original Apple II BASIC, the integer BASIC, we had nothing to do with. But then there was a floating point one where, and I mostly worked with Woz on that.
Let me tell this story.
Okay.
So Woz, my partner, we started out with this guy named Steve Wozniak, brilliant guy. He writes this BASIC that is like the best BASIC on the planet. It does stuff that no other BASIC's ever done. You don't have to run it to find your error messages. It finds them when you type it in and stuff. It's perfect in every way, except for one thing, which is it's just fixed point, right? It's not floating point. And so we're getting a lot of input that people want this BASIC to be floating point. And like we're begging Woz, please make this floating point.
Who's we? How many people are in Apple?
Well, me. Yeah. We're begging Woz to make this floating point. And he just never does it, and he wrote it by hand on paper. I mean, he didn't have an assembler or anything to write it with. It was all just written on paper, and he'd type it in. He just never got around to making a floating point.
Why?
Well, this is one of the mysteries of life. I don't know, but he never did. And so, Microsoft had this very popular, really good floating point BASIC that we ended up going to them and saying, help.
And how much was I think you were telling us earlier.
That was $31,000.
That Apple paid you for
the floating point BASIC. And I flew out to Apple. I spent 2 days there getting the cassette. The cassette tapes were the main ways that people stored things at the time.
Right.
And that was fun. I think the most fun is later when we worked together.
Well, what was the most fun? Tell the story about the most fun that was later.
And maybe later, not the most fun.
Let him talk. Then.
I'm teasing.
Is later when we worked together.
Well, what was the most fun? Tell the story about the most fun that was later.
And maybe later, not the most fun.
Let him talk. Then.
I'm teasing.
Well, Steve can probably start it better. The team that was assembled there to do the Macintosh was a very committed team, and there was an equivalent team on our side that just got totally focused on this activity. Jeff Harber's, a lot of incredible people. And we really had bet our future because on the Macintosh being successful, and then hopefully graphics interface in general being successful, but first and foremost, the thing that would popularize that being the Macintosh. And so we were working together. The schedules were uncertain. The quality was uncertain. The price. When Steve first came up, it was going to be a lot cheaper computer than it ended up being, but that was fine.
So you worked in both places, in both?
Well, we were in Seattle, and we fly down there.
But Microsoft, if I remember correctly, from what I read, wasn't Microsoft one of the few companies that were allowed to even have a prototype of the Mac at the time?
Well, what's interesting, what's hard to remember now, is that Microsoft wasn't in the applications business then. They took a big bet on the Mac because this is how they got into the apps business. I mean, Lotus dominated the apps business on the PC back then.
Right. We had done just Multiplan, which was a hit on the Apple II. And then Mitch did an incredible job betting on the IBM PC, and 123 came in and, ruled that part of the business. So the question was, what was the next paradigm shift that would allow for an entry? WordPerfect, we had Word, but WordPerfect was by far the strongest in word processing, DBase, and database.
And Word was that was a kind of a DOS, a text.
All of these products I'm saying were DOS-based products, because Windows wasn't in the picture at the time.
Right.
That's more in the early 90s that we get to that. And so we made this bet that the paradigm shift would be graphics interface, and in particular that the Macintosh would make that happen with 128K of memory, 22K of which was for the screen buffer, 14K was for the operating system. So it was
14K. Yeah, 14K.
Yeah.
The original Mac operating system was 14K.
14K that we had to have loaded when our software ran. So when the shell would come up, it had all the 128K.
The OS was bigger than 14K. It was in the 20s somewhere.
I see.
So when we ship these computers now with, a gigabyte, 2 gigabytes of memory, and nobody remembers. 128K.
I remember that. I remember paying a lot of money for computers with 128K in those days. So the two companies worked closely on the Mac project because you were maybe not the only, but the principal or one of the principal software creators for it, right? Is that right?
Well, Apple did the Mac itself, but we got Bill and his team involved to write these applications. And we were doing a few apps ourselves. We did Mac Paint and Mac Draw and stuff like that. But Bill and his team did some great work.
Now, in terms of moving forward, after you left and your company grew more and more strong, what did you think was going to happen to Apple after sort of the disasters that occurred after Steve left?
Well, Apple's fate hung in the balance. We continued to do Macintosh software, and Excel, which Steve and I introduced together in New York City. That was kind of a fun event. That went on and did very well. But then, Apple just wasn't differentiating itself well enough from the higher volume platform. And
meaning Windows, right? I mean,
DOS and Windows.
Okay, but especially Windows in the 90s began to take off.
By 1995, Windows became popular. The big debate wasn't sort of Mac versus Windows. The big debate was character mode interface versus graphics mode interface. And when the 386 came and we got more memory and the speed was adequate and some development tools came along, that paradigm bet on GUI paid off for everybody who'd gotten in early and said, this is the way that's going to go.
But so Apple wasn't able to leverage its products.
After the 512K Mac was done, the product line just didn't evolve as fast. Steve wasn't there as it needed to, and we were actually negotiating a deal to invest and make some commitments and things with Gil Amelio. And no, seriously. And
Don't be mean. Don't be mean to him.
I'm sorry?
Just saying the word Gil Amelio, you can see him just.
And so I was calling him up on the weekend and all this stuff, and next thing I knew, Steve called me up and said, "Don't worry about that negotiation with Gil Amelio. You can just talk to me now." And I said, "Wow."
Gil was a nice guy, but he had a saying. He said, Apple is like a ship with a hole in the bottom, leaking water. And my job is to get the ship pointed in the right direction.
Okay.
I want to get back to the thing we saw in 1997 at Macworld there, but Windows was just going great guns. I mean, Windows 95, to whatever extent earlier versions of Windows had not had all the features, all the GUI stuff that the Mac had, Windows 95 really was an enormous, enormous leap.
Yeah, Windows 95 is when graphics interface became mainstream, and when the software industry realized, wow, this is the way applications are going to be done. And it was amazing that it was ridiculed sort of in 93, 94. It was not mainstream. And then in 95, the debate was over. It was kind of just a common sense thing. And it was a combination of hardware and software maturity getting to a point that people could see it.
So I don't want to go through every detail, the whole history of how you came back, but
Thank you.
You had, but you in that video we all saw, you said you had decided that it was destructive to have this competition with Microsoft. Now, obviously, Apple was in a lot of trouble, and I presume that there was some tactical or strategic reason for that, as well as just wanting to be a nice guy, right? I mean,
you know, Apple was in very serious trouble, and what was really clear was that if the game was a zero-sum game where for Apple to win, Microsoft had to lose, then Apple was going to lose. But that's a lot of people's heads were still in that place.
Why was that from your perspective?
Well, a lot of people's heads were in that place at Apple, and even in the customer base, because, you know, Apple had invented a lot of this stuff, and Microsoft was being successful, and Apple wasn't, and there was jealousy and this and that. There was just a lot of reasons for it that don't matter. But the net result of it was there were too many people at Apple and in the Apple ecosystem playing the game of, for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. And it was clear that you didn't have to play that game, because Apple wasn't going to beat Microsoft. Apple didn't have to beat Microsoft. Apple had to remember who Apple was, because it had forgotten who Apple was. And so to me, it was pretty essential to break that paradigm. And it was also important that, you know, Microsoft was the biggest software developer outside of Apple developing for the Mac. And so, you know, it was just crazy what was happening at that time. And Apple was very weak. And so I called Bill up and we tried to patch things up.
Yeah, and since that time, we've had a team that's fairly dedicated to doing the Mac applications, and they've always been treated kind of in a unique way so that they can have a pretty special relationship with Apple. And that's worked out very well. In fact, every couple years or so, there's been something new that we've been able to do on the Mac, and
we have
it's a great business for us.
And it's actually, the relationship between the Mac development team at Microsoft and Apple is a great relationship. It's one of our best developer relationships.
And do you look at yourself as rivals now today as this landscape has evolved? And we'll talk about the internet landscape and everything else and other companies that have come forward. But how do you look at yourselves in this landscape today?
Because you are competitors in certain ways, which is the American way, right?
We watch the commercials.
And you get annoyed at each other from time to time.
You know what? I have to confess, I like PC Guy better.
Yeah, he's great.
I like him.
You know, the art of those commercials is not to be mean, but it's actually for the guys to like each other.
Thanks.
PC Guy is great.
I like PC.
Got a big heart.
His mother loves him.
His mother loves him.
I'm telling you.
Loves him.
I like PC Guy totally much better.
Wow.
I do. I don't know why. He's endearing. The other guy's
PC Guy is what makes it all work. Actually.
Yeah.
All right.
It's worth thinking about.
So how do you look at yourselves?
Let me just ask you, Bill. Obviously, Microsoft is a much larger company. You're in many more markets, many more types of products than Apple is. You know, when you were running the company, or when Steve Ballmer is running the company, you think obviously about Google. You think about, I don't know, Linux in the enterprise. You think about lots of, Sony in the game area. How often is Apple on your radar screen at Microsoft in a business sense?
Well, they're on the radar screen as an opportunity, and in a few cases like the Zune, that if you go over to that group, they think of Apple as a competitor. They love the fact that Apple's created a gigantic market, and they're going to try and come in and contribute something to that.
And we love them because they're all customers.
I have to tell you, I was actually told by Jay Allard, I'm serious, that because of the nature of the processor, the development platform they used to develop a lot of the software for the Xbox 360 was Macs. And he claimed that at one point they had placed the biggest order for whatever the Mac Tower was at the time of anybody, and it was Microsoft.
I don't know if it was the biggest, but yeah, we had the same processor, essentially, that the Mac had. This is one of those great ironies. They were switching away from that processor while the Xbox 360 was adopting it, but for good reasons, actually, in both cases, because we're not in a portable application, and that was one of the things that processor roadmap didn't have. But yes, we did. It shows pragmatism, but we try and do things that way. So that was the development system for the early people getting their software ready for the introduction of Xbox 360.
And we never ran an ad on that.
I see. Admirable restraint. That's wonderful.
There were hundreds of them.
Steve is so known for his restraint.
How do you look at Microsoft from an Apple perspective? I mean, you compete in computers and.
I mean, you could say you don't compete. You know, the era of destructive whatever whatever you said in 1997, but you think you're consciously aware of what they're doing with Windows. You followed Vista closely, I think.
What's really interesting is, and we talked about this earlier today. If you look at the reason that the iPod exists and that Apple's in that marketplace, it's because these really great Japanese consumer electronics companies who kind of owned the portable music market for a long, invented it and owned it, couldn't do the appropriate software. Couldn't conceive of and implement the appropriate software. Because an iPod's really just software. It's software in the iPod itself, it's software on the PC or the Mac, and it's software in the cloud for the store. And it's in a beautiful box, but it's software. If you look at what a Mac is, it's OS 10, right? It's in a beautiful box, but it's OS 10. And if you look at what an iPhone will hopefully be, it's software. And so the big secret about Apple, of course, not so big secret maybe, is that Apple views itself as a software company. And there aren't very many software companies left. And Microsoft is a software company. And so, we look at what they do and we think some of it's really great, and we think some of it's, a little bit of it's competitive, and most of it's not. We don't have a belief that the Mac is going to take over 80% of the PC market. We're really happy when our market share goes up a point. And we love that, and we work real hard at it. But Apple's fundamentally a software company, and there's not a lot of us left, and Microsoft's one.
But you may be fundamentally a software company, but you've been known, at least to your customers and to most journalists, as the company that kind of pays a lot of attention integrating software and hardware. Microsoft has made some recent moves to be a little more like that. Obviously not in your core biggest businesses, but with Xbox and Zune and the Surface computing a device we saw today is another example. These aren't markets that hold up in size to Windows or Office, but they're some of your more recent initiatives. Are the company's approaches to this verging a little? Or
Alan Kay had a great quote back in the 70s, I think. He said, people that love software want to do their own hardware.
Well, Bill loves software.
No, I can resist that. The question is, are there markets where the innovation and variety you get is a net positive? The negative is that in the early stage, you really want to do the two together. So you want to do prototyping and things like that. Really is one thing. And then let's take the phone market. We think we're on 140 different kinds of hardware. We think it's beneficial to us that even if we did a few ourselves, it wouldn't give us what we have through those partnerships. Likewise, if you take the robotics market, very undeveloped. We have over 140 all tiny volume robots using Microsoft software. And the creativity, building toys, security things, medical things, we love the innovation.
Do you ever regret, was there something you might have wanted to do differently? And maybe you feel like this happened after you left Apple. something you might have done differently that where you could have had a much bigger market share for the Mac?
Well, before I answer that, let me make a comment on Bill's answer there, which is, it's very interesting in the consumer market and the enterprise market. They're very different spaces. And in the consumer market, at least, I think one can make a pretty strong case that outside of Windows on PCs, it's hard to see other examples of the software and hardware being decoupled working super well yet. It might in the phone space over time. It might. But it's not clear. It's not clear. You can see a lot more examples of the hardware-software coupling working well. And so I think this is one of the reasons we all come to work every day is because nobody knows the answer to some of these questions, and we'll find out over the coming years. Maybe both will work fine. Yeah, and maybe they won't.
Yeah, it's good to try both approaches. In some product categories, take music players, the solo design worked better. In the PC market, the variety of designs at this stage has a higher share.
It has a higher share? Yeah, it has a lot higher share.
Well, it's not that much different in music players the other way around.
Is there some moment you feel like I should have done this or Apple should have done that and we could have had?
Oh, if not, to this idea of these hardware-software integration, and it's working very well now.
There's a lot of things that happened that I'm sure I could have done better when I was at Apple the first time, and a lot of things that happened after I left that I thought were wrong turns, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, and you kind of got to let go of that stuff. And we are where we are. So we tend to look forward. And one of the things I did when I got back to Apple 10 years ago was I gave the museum to Stanford and all the papers and all the old machines and kind of cleared out the cobwebs and said, let's stop looking backwards here. It's all about what happens tomorrow. And because you can't look back and say, well, gosh, I wish I hadn't gotten fired. I wish I was there. I wish this. I wish that. It doesn't matter. And so let's go invent tomorrow rather than worrying about what happened yesterday.
Let's talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about tomorrow, but let's talk about today, the landscape of how you see the different players in the market and how you look at what's developing now. What has surprised both of you since having been around for so long and still very active in everything? I mean, your companies are still critically key companies, but there are many, many companies that are becoming quite powerful. How do you look at the landscape at this moment and what's happening, especially in the internet space?
I think it's super healthy right now. I think there's a lot of young people out there building some great companies who want to build companies, who aren't just interested in starting something and selling it to one of the big guys, but who want to build companies. And I think there's some really exciting companies getting built out there. Some next generation of stuff that some of us play catch up with, and some of us find ways to partner with and things like that. But there's a lot of activity out there now, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I'd say it's a healthy period. Yeah. The notion of what the new form factors look like, what natural interface can do, the ability to use the cloud, the internet, to do part of the task in a complementary way to the local experience. There's a lot of invention that the whole approach of startups, the existing companies who do research, we'll look back at this as one of the great periods of invention.
I think so too. There's a lot of things that are risky right now, which is always a good sign, and you can see through them. You can see to the other side and go, yes, this could be huge, but there's a period of risk that nobody's ever done it before.
Do you have an example that would, for example?
I do, but I can't say.
Okay.
And so, but I can say when you feel like that, that's a great thing.
Right.
That's what keeps you coming to work in the morning, and and it tells you there's something exciting around the next corner.
Okay, so the two of you have. Certainly, you're involved every day with the internet. You have internet products. You have a whole slew of stuff on the internet. You have iTunes and .Mac and all of that. But on another level, you're the guys who represent the rich client, the personal computer, the big operating system and all that. And there is a certain school of thought, and I'm sure it's shared by some people in the room, that this is all migrating to the cloud and you'll need a fairly light piece of hardware that won't have to have all that investment, all the kind of stuff you guys have done throughout your careers. So as much as people might think of you as rivals, one way to think of you as the two guys.
They were both dinosaurs.
Huh?
They were both dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs or whatever. I can talk about that? No. Seriously, is
You're
there
betting on
in
a
5
system that is
years?
changing.
In 5 years, is the personal computer still going to be the linchpin of all this stuff?
Well, you can say that it'll be predicted that it won't be. The network computer took us over about, 5 years ago we disappeared. Remember the single function computer? There was somebody who said that these general purpose things are kind of a dumb idea. That took us over. The mainstream is always under attack. The thing that people don't realize is that you're going to have rich local functionality. I mean, at least our bet. As you get things like speech and vision, as you get more natural form factors, it's a question of using that local richness together with the richness that's elsewhere. And as you look at the device, say, that's connecting to the TV set or connecting in the car, there are lighter weight hardware internet connections. But when you come to the full screen, rich, edit the document, create things, I think we're nowhere near where we can be on making that stronger.
I'll give you a concrete example. I love Google Maps, use it on my computer, in a browser. But when we were doing the iPhone, we thought, wouldn't it be great to have maps on the iPhone? And so we called up Google, and they'd done a few client apps in Java on some phones, and they had an API that we worked with them a little on. And we ended up writing a client app for those APIs. They would provide the back-end service. And the app we were able to write, since we're pretty reasonable at writing apps, blows away any Google Maps client. Just blows it away. Same set of data coming off the server, but the experience you have using it is unbelievable. It's way better than the computer. And just in a completely different league than what they'd put on phones before. And, that client is the result of a lot of technology on the client, that client application. So when we show it to them, they're just blown away by how good it is. And you can't do that stuff in a browser. So people are figuring out how to do more in a browser, how to get persistent state of things when you're disconnected from a browser, how do you actually run apps locally using apps written in those technologies so they can be pretty transparent whether you're connected or not. But it's happening fairly slowly, and there's still a lot you can do with a rich client environment. At the same time, the hardware is progressing to where you can run a rich client environment on lower and lower cost devices, on lower and lower power devices. And so there's some pretty cool things you can do with clients.
So so you're saying rich clients still matter, but maybe I misunderstood you, but your example was about a rich client that is not a personal computer as we have thought of a personal
What
computer.
I'm trying to say is I think the marriage of some really great client apps with some really great cloud services is incredibly powerful, and right now can be way more powerful than just having a browser on the client.
You're talking about a software company being a software and services company rather than a...
I'm saying the marriage of these services plus a more sophisticated client is a very powerful marriage.
Bill,
architecturally, the question is, do you run just in the cloud and all you have down locally is the browser? And that is the same question for the phone as it is for the full screen device. There'll always be different screen sizes because these are, the 5-inch screen does not really compete with the 20-inch screen, does not compete with the big living room screen. Those are things that there'll be some type of computing behind all of those things, all connected to the internet. But the idea that locally you have the responsiveness of immediate interaction without the latency or bandwidth limitations that you get if you try and do it all behind. That's what leads to the right balance.
What does that
That's what leads to the right balance.
What does that device look like in 5 years? What would be your principal device? Is there one or?
Is it a? I think you use. I could be wrong. I think you carry a tablet.
Right.
Right. Which has not necessarily stormed the world yet.
Yeah, this is like Windows 1992, I think. That is, I'm unrepentant on my belief.
Okay. But go back to Kara's point, what would you each imagine that you would carry as your principal, let's say, thing to do
I mean,
the
Jeff
web
Hawkins
and
showed a very lightweight
email
device
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw, but Jeff Hawkins showed a Linux-based, a very small, I think he called it a companion to a smartphone today.
A phone companion. It sounded a little naughty, frankly.
It doesn't matter, you weren't there, but what would you think each would be? I assume you carry a tablet PC. I don't know what brand it is. Maybe you change them up. I don't know. You obviously carry a MacBook Pro, I would guess, or a MacBook.
Yeah, well, and an iPhone.
And an iPhone.
You have one?
I do.
Right here?
Yes.
Well, he has when he took it out before. Really? He flashed his iPhone earlier today.
Anyway, go ahead. So what is your device?
What's your device in 5 years that you rely on the most?
I don't think you'll have one device. I think you'll have a full-screen device that you can carry around, and you'll do dramatically more reading off of that. I believe in the tablet form factor. I think you'll have voice. I think you'll have ink. You'll have some way of having a hardware keyboard and some settings for that. And then you'll have the device that fits in your pocket, which the whole notion of how much function should you combine in there. There's navigation computers, there's media, there's phone. Technology is letting us put more things in there, but then again, you really want to tune it so people know what they expect. So there's quite a bit of experimentation in that pocket-sized device. But I think those are natural form factors, and that we'll have the evolution of the portable machine and the evolution of the phone will both be extremely high volume, complementary. That is, if you own one, you're more likely to own the other.
And then at home, you'd have a setup that they all plug into?
Well, at home, you'll have your living room, which is your 10-foot experience, and that's connected up to the internet. And there you'll have gaming and entertainment. And there's a lot of experimentation in terms of what content looks like in that world. And then in your den, you'll have something a lot like you have at your desk at work. The view is that every horizontal and vertical surface will have a projector, so you can put information. Your desk can be a surface that you can sit and manipulate things.
Can I please have a room in my house that doesn't have a screen and a projector in it?
You bet.
Thanks.
The bathroom.
Well, that's the perfect place for it, actually.
So what's your 5-year outlook at the devices you'll carry?
It's interesting. The PC has proved to be very resilient. Because as Bill said earlier, the death of the PC has been predicted every few years.
And here, when you're saying PC, you mean personal computer in general, not just Windows PCs.
I mean personal computer in general. Okay. And there was the age of productivity, if you will, the spreadsheets and word processors, and that kind of got the whole industry moving. And it kind of plateaued for a while, was getting a little stale, and then the internet came along, right? And everybody needed more powerful computers to get on the internet. Browsers came along, and it was this whole internet age that came along, access to the internet. And then some number of years ago, you could start to see that the PC, that was taken for granted, things had kind of plateaued a little bit, and innovation-wise at least. And then I think this whole notion of the PC, we called it the digital hub, but you can call it anything you want, sort of the multimedia center of the house, started to take off with digital cameras and digital camcorders and sharing things over the internet and kind of needing a repository for all that stuff. And it was reborn again as sort of the hub of your digital life. And you can sort of see that there's something starting again. It's not clear exactly what it is, but it will be the PC maybe used a little more tightly coupled with some back-end internet services and some things like that. And of course, PCs are going mobile in an ever greater degree. So I think the PC is going to continue, this general purpose device is going to continue to be with us and morph with us, whether it's a tablet or a notebook or a big curved desktop that you have at your house or whatever it might be. So I think that'll be something that most people have, at least in this society. In others, maybe not, but certainly in this one. But then there's an explosion that's starting to happen in these, what you call post-PC devices, right? And you call the iPod one of them. There's a lot of things that are not...
You can get into trouble for using that term. I want you to know that.
What?
I'm kidding. Post-PC devices.
Why?
People write letters to the editor. They complain about it. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think there's just a category of devices that aren't as general purpose, that aren't they're really more focused on specific functions, whether they're phones or iPods or Zunes or what have you. And I think that category of devices is going to continue to be very innovative, and we're going to see lots of them.
Give me an example of what that would be.
Well, an iPod was a post-PC device. A phone is a post-PC